All right, so good to see everyone. Mike Ewall with Energy Justice Network, and here to talk to you about why we should not be burning our trash. So, for those unfamiliar, I'm the founder and executive director of Energy Justice Network. You can find us online here. Michelle's also got a sign-up sheet of mine she'll pass around. So, if anyone wants to get plugged in with our work, that's one way to do it. Also, I have a stack of interesting guides over there on false solutions to climate change that I'm trying to not go home with. So please grab one of those if it looks interesting on your way out. So, all right, here we go. Introduction to where we are. Not very far from here, within a handful of miles, I think, is one of the largest air polluters in Broward County, which is the Wheelbrader South Broward Trash Incinerator. It's a little hard to read this slide, but you can see that they're one of the top air polluters and all the different chemicals, and it talks about all the different health impacts caused when we burn trash, including this specific incinerator and all the stuff is kicking out for us to breathe today. Now, Florida, I'm going to move this a little bit so I can see the slides because I'm not. Okay. Okay. That they will sooner shut a plant down than have the real data come out of how toxic they actually are. And there's also a study recently, last year, of moss downwind of that incinerator, and they found higher levels of toxic metals closer to the plant, directly correlated with the distance. Okay, this keyboard doesn't like me. Okay, here we go. So part of the trend is that this industry is shutting down over time. We are down to 62 trash incinerators left. My personal goal is to get the rest of these closed down in the next decade so I can have time with the rest of my life to beat up some other industries. So I need your help to get the rest of these closed. Now, the lifespan of these facilities, of the 54 that have now closed since year 2000, was only 26 years old on average when they closed. The one in the backyard here is already 34 years old. Rarely do they make it past their 40th birthday. And there have been no new incinerators built at a new location in this country in 30 years now, despite hundreds of attempts. The only new one that was built right next to an existing one in West Palm Beach, county north of here, where they're trying to now build another one to replace the first old one. So we're working to get that stopped. But the thing is, this is an industry that no one can pick a new place and say, we're going to build one here and actually get away with it. But convincing our public officials not to spend this time fighting the community until they lose, they might as well just learn sooner to give up so they can start working on zero waste and stop fighting the community on losing battles. So I've been asked to do a few studies. One recently, the most recent one that come out, it's just being unrolled. We're calling it "It's Not Green." Had a little Kermit theme there, and this is on the Palm Beach County one, the new plant that they will be building, showing that even the modern new trash incinerators on newest that come out last December, they would still be one of the largest air polluters in Palm Beach County if they built it. And the county south of here, same story. If they built the biggest one in the country, they've been talking about 4,000 tons a day. And if they built that there and they call it the cleanest and greenest and all this nice hype, it would still be one of the largest air polluters in Miami-Dade County if they built it. I also did a study showing that the first 10 years of that new incinerator in the county north of us, their track record shows over 160 or 170 some violations and other mishaps in just the first decade of operation. And that's with thousands of records like inspection reports that we didn't even have time to look at yet. This is just the stuff we had compiled in that time. And this is just from the past year, these different reports that you can see here. And the final report that I did that's on the specifics to Florida here was for Miami-Dade County, actually is commissioned by the city of Miramar, to look at where could the waste go. Now, everyone knows landfills are bad. What you might not understand yet is that incinerators are that much worse. And so part of, and I'll show you that in a minute, but this study was to show which are the better landfills to be using. And we looked at 63 landfills, all the ones in Florida, all the ones up to Atlanta in Georgia, and ranked them across 18 different criteria and found the best ones to use. So landfills are no angels. Even the best ones on this map are not the best things to be using, but they're far better than using an incinerator. And this is just a close-up of that. I'll skip over that. So let's see how incinerators compare to other things. Now, usually we're comparing to landfills. We'll get to that in a minute, but there's also the fact that this industry likes to market how much they are energy facilities. And so if you're going to be an energy facility, how do you compare to what we all understand to be the dirtiest type of energy facility? And most people would say, well, that's coal, right? I would argue it's nuclear, but that's a whole other matter. But coal plants are filthy. Trash incinerators are filthier, even though they tend to be decades younger and have more pollution control devices on them. So this is after the scrubbers and other pollution control devices that they have on them. They still kick out so much more pollution per megawatt hour that comparing them to a coal plant makes the coal plant look good by comparison. But the real issue is, how does it compare to landfills? And of course, when you're comparing it, it's not incinerator versus landfill. It's incinerator with an ash landfill versus just going straight to the landfill. So there's still a landfill. It's just, do you want a bigger one that's stinkier or a smaller one that's going to kill you with cancer? You know, the toxic ash still has to go to a landfill, unless they try to do like Palm Beach County wants to do and build roads with it, which has not worked out elsewhere in the country, including my home county in Pennsylvania, which is the model plant, and that failed 2.5 years ago, and they still get trotted out as a model like in Hawaii right now. And they say, we're going to be like that plant. I'm like, that's not working, right? But yeah. So we use the most comprehensive life cycle assessment tool out there, which is called MEBCalc. It's the Monetizing Environmental Benefits Calculator. It looks at 9 different environmental and health criteria and can add them up in a monetized score. So way better than the ones that just look at climate impacts and have flaws in those models anyway. So what we found, this is one of the studies we did. This is from Montgomery County, Maryland, where they have a Covanta or ReWorld incinerator. And we found that it's over 3 times more harmful, the incinerator, than going straight to the landfill. It's about twice as bad in blue for climate impacts. But then you have to add in the heart attacks and strokes in brown from the particulate matter, the asthma attacks in yellow from the nitrogen oxides, the cancers and birth defects and other impacts of toxic chemicals in red. And then you got some other layers on top of that, far worse than going straight to a landfill with that waste. And another popular misconception, and we just ran into this yesterday when meeting with a public official in Palm Beach County, one of their commissioners thinks that, oh, well, transporting it with these dirty diesel trucks farther away to get to a landfill is much worse because the trucks are the problem. Well, that same study looked at the greenhouse gases from the incinerator in red versus 10 landfills in yellow. The blue and black caps are the transportation. So if it's by truck, it's in blue. If it's by rail, it's in black. You would have to drive a truck from, in this case, Maryland, from Maryland to California to reach a landfill to almost catch up to the difference where you're as bad as an incinerator. There is no argument to be made anywhere in the US, unless we're going to maybe drive up to Alaskan landfills, to be able to say that incinerating close to home is preferable than driving a truck to a landfill at any distance. There's no reasonable distance that they can successfully make this argument, not based on data. So in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, a similar study was done more recently, looking at the largest incinerator in the country, found the same sort of thing. So I won't walk you through. It's the same idea, but this is the incinerator. This is the landfill that they use. This is the incinerator after you do some subtractions where you say, well, it makes energy, so let's assume a gas plant somewhere isn't operating, and we get metals out of the ash, so we don't have to have those impacts somewhere else. Even after that, still significantly worse than going straight to the landfill. And what we found when we looked at comparing this to zero waste, so the previous slide was per ton. This is the whole system now. So all the Delaware County trash, this is in millions now of dollars, 104 millions of dollars per year of health and environmental impacts from their current system with an incinerator versus about 85% less if we do a zero waste, which means no incineration and reduce, reuse, recycle, and all the good things that are in the zero waste plan. Now, the benefits, in other words, avoided harms of the recycling they're currently doing, much bigger. But if they adopt the zero waste plan, doubles those avoided harms that will come from recycling, composting, reduction, and all that. Now, last slide from this. This is looking at that same incinerator in Pennsylvania versus the same landfill you just saw, but these are 3 different scenarios of landfill gas capture. And we know landfills are bad for climate. Methane's about 80-some% worse than CO2. Sorry, not percent, 82 times worse. And if they capture as much gas as they usually say, then it's about that last line. If they catch none of their gas, it's still not as bad as an incinerator in general. This is including climate, but also other health impacts. And the transportation is so small, that's the yellow sliver in there. And so when they argue transportation, again, another study showing that that is just not the issue. So incinerator ash, you get for about every 100 tons burned, you get about 30 tons of toxic ash. And the reason I have coffee beans on this slide is that if you pour water over coffee beans, you're not going to get coffee, right? But you grind them up and increase the surface area, now you can get coffee. Same principle with ash versus trash in a landfill. If you take this phone and chuck it into the landfill, the toxic metals and the brominated flame retardants that are in this phone are going to be really hard to reach me in a way I can eat, breathe, or drink. But as soon as you burn this, for trash in general, not specifically phones, 70% of that pollution is now in the air. The rest of it is now fine particles that can blow off of trucks, can blow off the top of the landfill, can leach into the groundwater more. So I would rather live next to a landfill that doesn't have ash in it than one that has ash, because that just makes the whole system that much more dangerous. Of course, you want to get organics out so you don't have a stinky, gassy landfill either. So one slide on environmental racism was the next one here. That is a distinct trend in this industry. There are some reports out there that massively exaggerate it, so please don't use that. Use honest, accurate numbers. And we don't need to exaggerate to make our case here. So most of the incinerators in the country, over 60%, are in majority white communities. However, that's not the case in Florida. And in general, across the country, it's the bigger incinerators that are more urban, impacting more people. So the whole industry ends up having a very racist effect. And it's not by class, it's not because people are poor. We see examples where they're wealthier than average, but they're people of color, and that's where the incinerator seems to sit. And so there's a distinct environmental racism trend in this industry, especially for Black people in this country. However, it's not something you can just add up and say how many incinerators are in environmental justice communities and look at a percent. It's just not that simple. You have to look at how big it is or how urban it is. Okay, so the zero waste. Zero waste is defined, as you all know, it used to be 3 paragraphs. Now we got it done in 1 sentence several years ago. So it says, without burning, there is no such thing as zero waste with incineration. It's defined to mean that there is no incineration. And the zero waste hierarchy, which I developed, that's now adopted by ZWIA and is used internationally as a standard, shows that incineration is unacceptable, but landfilling is the backstop. They are not equal. They're not equally bad. Zero waste does not mean no waste to landfill or incinerator, because that's still a goal. So when we talk about getting to zero waste, it means you cut off the worst thing right away. Incineration has to go, because you can't even do zero waste when you have contracts that promise a certain amount of waste to an incinerator anyway. So incineration has to be off the table immediately if you want to be called zero waste. And I've been talking to some folks about how we get that into the certification policies, but landfilling is the backstop, and we ultimately try to get to at least 90% reduction from landfill. So we've been working to change some things at EPA. The Environmental Protection Agency has their own waste hierarchy that says the opposite, that says incineration is better than landfilling. 1 minute. Okay. I'm in the final stretch here, I think. We've been working on reforming EPA on a whole number of things relating to their biases on incineration. And we've made progress on some. We got an article in Waste Dive about it. And this is their hierarchy. We got them a few years ago to put a disclaimer on here saying they're revisiting this because they admitted to us that they have zero documentation to back up their placement of incineration above landfilling. And part of their reevaluating was taking so long as they had to revisit a model, that warm model that always says incineration is better, but has some major flaws. So we got that peer reviewed for the first time, got public comments in on it, got some other victories as well in terms of toxic releases. The incineration industry has been exempt from having to report toxic emissions when other industries have to. They've always been exempt. So we won a rulemaking petition, and they're going to have to start doing that maybe after this administration. I don't know. And the fourth thing that we won from EPA so far is a statement. This is this past December, where they now put in writing that even if the test for ash says non-hazardous, that does not mean non-toxic or inert or safe. It could still be dangerous in other contexts. And finally, we are very close. Actually, tomorrow I'll be able to brag whether we won or not in Hawaii, where we are close to getting them to be the first state to ban ash recycling into roads, like they're also trying to do in the county north of here. Let me see. Okay, I have one more slide. I have a little bit to say on that. So zero waste is a two-track process. We need to end incineration as soon as possible because it stands in the way of zero waste, and it's just the thing that we can do more immediately than actually trying to reach zero waste. We can try it, but it takes a while. So the important lesson of this, without going into all the details here, is don't tie these two together. I've seen communities make the mistake of saying, well, we'll shut our incinerator down once we get 80% diversion or something. And then you never end up shutting the incinerator down, and the contracts stay in place and get extended. And then it just stands in the way of actually doing zero waste, and you still get polluted. So we need to prioritize one over the other to some extent, but work on both at the same time as full speed as we can, and just keep them from being linked to each other. So, and then there are false solutions like zero waste to landfill, we know, and we're at them. So thank you so much. Look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mike. We have time for 2 questions. If you'd like to ask a question, come see me. I think that would be the easiest. You think so, Mary? Or do we have any questions? Really?
Oh, come on, you've got them. Don't be shy. Steve's got one.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, Mike, of course, so much appreciation for the work you do. So more a clarification, and it's from your work that I convinced me, and that is that so much of what goes to landfill are plastics that have no environmental impact, although they end up in landfills permanently, obviously. But when they go to an incinerator, they're burned. And of course, that's turned into not only toxic emissions, but CO2 and greenhouse gases. So I don't know if you want to describe that in further detail, but again, for me, that was the selling point.
Yeah, there was a plastics and climate report done by the Center for International Environmental Law that I thought had a very interesting little chart in it that I throw into some of my other presentations. And you can see that source reduction and recycling both have very big and positive impacts, especially source reduction with plastics. But when you compare the landfilling versus incineration of the plastics, landfilling impact is slightly negative, but it's barely even there. It's almost not visible, the line. And incineration, very big impact line. And we've seen this in other studies like in Hawaii, where they looked at the same sort of thing. And what happens if you take plastics and put it in landfill, people often, like, just average people will freak out and be like, oh, that means it's going to end up in the ocean. And that's bad. Landfills are bad. They're never going to go away. It's like, well, that is a selling point. It's not going to end up in the ocean if it goes to a landfill. I mean, unless, I don't know, flooding, there are exceptions to that. But for the most part, it stays in one place. And that is good. That's carbon sequestration, the sequestration of the toxic chemicals that, yes, eventually some of them will leak. but for the most part, you're keeping it contained in one place. And that's far better than you burn it and instantly all the CO2 and other toxic chemicals and new ones that are made in the process are injected into the atmosphere. So it's just night and day as far as plastics.
Thank you, Mike. And we have this is a virtual audience. Gary Liss has a question on Zoom. Does the EPA wasted food scale provide a better direction for waste hierarchies?
Good one, Gary. So EPA has had a food waste recovery hierarchy. Now it's called a wasted food scale. And one of the nice things about that, this is the latest hierarchy for waste that I know that EPA has put out. And it says landfills and incinerators are on the same level. They're both unacceptable and bad. And that is big progress for an agency that for years has been saying incineration is better than landfilling on waste in general. And we have most of our states and counties and cities and consultants copying that EPA hierarchy and not even knowing that there's been a disclaimer on it for 3 years almost. And just saying incinerators are better because these people know best. Well, those people who know best are the ones that have no documentation for the one that says incinerators are better, but their latest thing is saying they're both in the bad category and they're not giving a preference to it in that food waste scale. So that's progress as far as EPA goes.
Thank you. Michelle and then Dennis. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. Mike, can you explain how incinerators disincentivize zero waste as well in terms of why food waste is needed in the incinerator process and how the plastics industry and the incinerator industry really do go hand in hand, that they benefit, they profit from each other's model?
Good question. So we used to think that incinerators compete with stuff that burns well, with recycling of things that burns well, like paper and plastics. And we thought they want that stuff, so of course they won't want them recycled. And I think that may have shifted at some point, because I remember it was several years ago, I toured the incinerator in Baltimore, and I made that argument, and they said, no, that's not true. We love plastics recycling. Well, and he was like, shh, don't tell anyone this, but we actually compete more with composting. And I was like, well, why is that? They compete more with composting because there's so much plastic in the waste stream that it heats up their boilers, which are only rated at a certain amount of BTUs per hour. So a certain amount of energy can go in for a unit of time, and they can overheat. And when they get too much energy value in them, they can't feed as much waste, and they get paid per ton. So they are happy to have the compost in an incinerator because it cools their system down. They can feed more waste. So that kind of flipped the understanding of that. But the other answer to your question, Michelle, is that typically incinerators have what are called put or pay clauses in their contract. And so with landfills, you rarely ever see this. Landfills, you can fill them up slowly, and that's a good thing, and it's okay. But an incinerator, you have to feed them a certain amount of tons per day, or they are not economical. And so they're the ones that typically have the contracts that say, give us a certain amount of trash or pay us anyway as if you did. And then it's a great deal for the company running an incinerator, because for the same capacity, they can get paid to not take your waste and get paid again to take someone else's waste. But for your municipality or your county, you have to pay twice if you want to do the right thing. You have to pay once to reduce, reuse, recycle, or compost, and then pay again to not use the incinerator to the extent that you're not meeting that tonnage limit. So that is a serious disincentive to zero waste. And that's why I think the contracts with incinerators stand in the way. And it's one of the reasons why we need to prioritize ending incineration if we want zero waste.
Hey, Mike. So I do have a question, which is, we often hear about medical waste as the incineration as the solution for medical waste. So can you talk about that?
Yes, good one. So
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. So in 1988, there were over 6,200 medical waste incinerators, according to EPA. They have a whole list of them. The latest list was 2013. There were about 30 some. They're now down to about 20 to 30 in the country. Medical waste did not go away. It's just the industry switched to cheaper, safer, non-burn solutions like autoclaving. But now we're finding ourselves with centralized facilities, including trash incinerators that are burning medical waste. So Florida, in Lake County, you have a small trash incinerator run by Cavanta, now Reworld, that burns medical waste, but it's exempt from the standards that are much stricter for medical waste incinerators, like you have in the county next door in Apopka, where they're just burning medical waste. And I'll be speaking up there soon with the farm workers because they're concerned about that. So there are alternatives. There's no need, there's no legal requirement either to burn medical waste. Cavantas argued that all states except a handful require it. They turned out to be lying to us. It turns out 0 states require it. And there are a handful that say tiny subsets like pathological waste or chemotherapeutic waste have to be burned, but for the most part, not required and also not necessary.
Thank you, Mike. Round of applause for Mike Ewall. Energy Justice Network doing incredible work.